Do you know that feeling when everything is about to fall apart? That was exactly how I felt that Thursday morning as the Miami sunlight poured through my bedroom window. My name is Catherine Miller, 72 years old, and I never imagined that at this age I would be telling a story like this. I stood in my bedroom, packing the last few things into the navy blue suitcase my late husband had given me 15 years ago. Every fold was neat and precise, just as my mother had taught me. I chose a few light dresses for the sunny days in Florida, a thin jacket for the cool evenings by the beach, and my blood pressure pills organized in a 7-day container. Everything was ready for the family trip we had been planning for months. On the nightstand sat a photo from my 70th birthday me, my son Michael, my daughter-in-law Laura, and my 2 grandchildren, Ethan and Grace, all smiling, all pretending. Looking back, the signs had always been there. The way Laura avoided standing too close to me in the picture, the impatience in Michael's eyes when I walked slowly to the car, the whispered conversations that stopped the moment I entered the room. I closed the suitcase and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands, marked by time, trembled slightly, not from excitement, but from a growing sense of dread. I smoothed my silver hair, adjusted the pearl necklace my students had given me when I retired, and took a deep breath. The doorbell rang. Michael called to say he was downstairs. I answered with the joy only a mother about to travel with her family could feel. I double-checked the documents, locked the windows, and turned off the water filter. Small habits of a woman who had lived alone since my husband, Leonard, passed away. When the elevator doors opened, I saw Michael's black SUV parked by the entrance. My son leaned against the car, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up as I approached. That small gesture, or rather, that indifference, should have been my final warning. "Hi, son," I said as the doorman helped me with my luggage. Michael finally looked up. His face carried that same expression I had seen for 45 years, the look of a child about to admit he had broken something valuable. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, opening the car door. I got in, feeling the blast of cold air from the air conditioner. The silence inside was heavy as stone. Michael started the engine and turned in the opposite direction of the highway. "Is something wrong?" I asked, gripping my purse straps. He adjusted the rearview mirror, avoiding my eyes. "Mom, there's been a small change of plans." And that was how it began. Each word he spoke was a quiet stab. At first, vague talk about my health, then about needing special care. Finally, the blunt truth. "Laura doesn't want you to come, Mom. She thinks you'll distract the kids, slow things down, and be a burden." My heart stopped for a moment. Outside, the world went on, people passing, traffic roaring, but inside that car, time stood still. I looked at the son I had once cradled, taught to read, comforted through nightmares, supported in every decision. Now he looked at me with a mix of shame and annoyance. "So where are we going?" I asked, though I already knew. "To Maplewood Retreat, Mom. It's a wonderful place, doctors on staff, activities for seniors. Just temporary, while we're away." Maplewood Retreat. The same place he'd shown me 3 months earlier, suggesting it might be a good option for the future. I should have seen it then. When the car stopped in front of the white iron gates, my chest tightened, unrelated to blood pressure. Michael turned off the engine and faced me. "Mom, everything's arranged. 2 weeks here, your own room, low-sodium meals. They'll take good care of you." I looked out the window. An elderly woman with snowy hair sat blankly in the garden while a nurse tucked a blanket around her. Is that what my son saw when he looked at me? A helpless old woman? A burden? A problem to be solved? "Son," I said calmly, "I packed for the beach, not for a nursing home." Michael sighed, as though speaking to a stubborn child. "Mom, this is better for everyone. Laura's stressed with work. The kids are teenagers, and we need time for ourselves. You'll understand." Something inside me shifted, then not anger, but a cold, clear realization. Years of sacrifice, financial help, dreams put aside so he could succeed, and this was the end, discarded like an old piece of furniture. While he talked on about music night on Wednesday at Maplewood, I quietly opened my purse. My fingers touched the smartphone he had insisted I buy, never imagining I had learned to use it far better than he thought. "Everything all right, son?" I asked, interrupting his speech. "I'd like to take a look around." The surprise on his face was obvious. He was expecting tears, maybe pleading, not calm acceptance. I stepped out with composure as he pulled my suitcase from the trunk. While he spoke with the receptionist who came to greet us, I quickly sent a text to the number I had memorized years ago for emergencies only. "Attorney Bernard, it's time to activate Project Phoenix." Code word, retribution. Bernard wasn't just my lawyer, he was the only person besides me who knew the truth about the real estate fortune everyone believed belonged to Michael. "Mom, I'll leave you here with Miss Linda," Michael said. "She'll show you your room. I need to get back and pack for the kids." I smiled faintly, a smile that made him hesitate. He kissed my forehead and said the words that sealed his fate. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll handle everything, your cards, your accounts, your bills. You just rest." If only he knew. As he drove away, leaving me with the suitcase meant for a vacation that would never happen, the plan I had built for years began to unfold. In his office, Attorney Bernard was likely already opening files Michael didn't even know existed. Soon, the credit cards my son mentioned so confidently would be useless. I watched his card disappear down the road. Beside me, Linda spoke about meal schedules and activities, but my mind was elsewhere, already calculating the next steps. You might be wondering how a 72-year-old woman, seemingly fragile, could turn the tables like this. Before I was just Grandma Catherine, I was someone else. My room was simple but clean. A single bed with a floral blanket, a small dresser, a table, a chair, and a window overlooking a neat garden. Linda continued explaining the daily schedule and medication routine. I nodded, playing the role of the polite, docile woman they thought I was. "You'll like it here," she said kindly. "We play chess on Tuesdays and bingo on Thursdays." "I'm sure I will," I replied, discreetly checking my phone. The message had been received. Bernard's response was one word: begin. Once I was alone, I sat on the bed and let the tears fall, not tears of despair, but the slow burn of years of disappointment each time Michael had shown his ingratitude. I cried for a few minutes, then wiped my face, retouched my powder, and pulled from the suitcase a tablet, a gift from a former student now working in cybersecurity, who had made it nearly impossible to trace. I turned it on, connected to the nursing home's Wi-Fi with the password I had cleverly spotted at the front desk, and logged into an email account not under my name but long used to monitor hidden investments. Everything I needed was there: bank statements, stock reports, company files. What Michael never imagined was that his quiet teacher mother had never stopped being the financial strategist she once was. When Leonard died, leaving me a large insurance payout, I didn't put it all into savings like Michael assumed. I invested in promising stocks, bought into startups, and, most importantly, quietly became the majority shareholder of the company he thought was his. Miller Real Estate Group began with a loan I gave him 15 years ago. He had just married, full of ambition, eager to enter Florida's booming real estate market. As a mother, I supported him. As an economist, I insisted on partial ownership. Michael signed the documents without reading carefully, trusting that his mother would never do anything against him. I never harmed him. I simply kept the control I had earned. As the company grew, I created offshore holding entities to manage the shares. Michael believed he owned 85%, but in truth, he had only 30%. The rest belonged to me and attorney Bernard, whom he thought handled only legal paperwork. He never suspected a thing because I never interfered in his decisions, never demanded reports or profits, only played the proud mother. My only condition was that a portion of profits go to a fund supporting low-income seniors. Ironic, isn't it? But 2 years ago, I started noticing inconsistencies in the financial reports. The charity fund received less money, while Michael and Laura lived more extravagantly. Yachts, a vacation mansion in the Tennessee mountains, expensive jewelry, luxurious trips. I began to suspect embezzlement. I secretly hired a forensic accountant, a former colleague who owed me a favor. The findings were worse than I expected. In addition to siphoning charity funds, Michael was committing tax fraud and using fake names to flip inflated real estate properties. He was building his wealth on my trust and on breaking the law. For months, I wrestled between maternal instinct and justice. I gathered evidence, documents, recordings, and built what I called Project Phoenix, a detailed plan for the day he crossed the line I once believed he never would. That line was when he treated me like something disposable. I opened the encrypted folder on my tablet containing the full plan. Each file was organized by phase: financial lockdown, public disclosure, legal action, asset restructuring, and finally, renewal. Every stage had clear instructions, contacts, documents to send, actions to execute. Bernard was now initiating the first phase, legally authorized through papers Michael himself had signed, believing they were precautionary forms in case something happened to me. Bernard had full power to freeze all accounts, credit cards, and assets, personal and corporate alike. As I checked my task list, a soft knock startled me. An elderly man, 78 years old, stepped in and introduced himself as George, a resident there for 3 years. He smiled and handed me a cup of chamomile tea. "Linda asked me to bring this to you," he said. "I know the first day is always the hardest." I thanked him and invited him to sit. His sharp, lively eyes told me he wasn't as frail as he appeared. We chatted for a while before he nodded toward my still-closed suitcase. "You haven't unpacked?" he asked. "I don't plan to stay long." I smiled. George nodded knowingly. "Let me guess your son brought you here," said it was temporary. "But you and I both know what that really means." I looked at him, surprised by his perception. "Happens all the time," he continued. "My daughter brought me here 3 years ago, said it was just until my room was renovated. That room's still not done." His calm acceptance pierced my heart. Was that the fate Michael had in mind for me? Forgotten in a place like this, with only a few obligatory visits each year? "I'm different," I said, meeting his eyes. "This so-called temporary stay will truly be temporary. My son's about to learn a lesson he'll never forget." George smiled, asking no more. He simply offered to show me around Maplewood Retreat, and I agreed. Knowing the terrain is always the first step in any strategy. As we walked, my phone vibrated. A message from Bernard. Phase 1, complete. All accounts and cards frozen. They should have arrived at the resort by now. I typed back. Proceed to Phase 2. Phase 2 involved sending official notifications to all shareholders, partners, and clients of Miller Real Estate Group, revealing the true ownership structure and exposing the financial fraud. At the same time, the evidence files were being forwarded to the Internal Revenue Service and the District Attorney's Office. When George led me through the common room, where a few elderly residents were watching a TV show, I imagined Michael and Laura arriving at their luxury resort in Miami, checking in. Cards declined. Chaos. Embarrassment. Frantic phone calls to the bank, the accountant, and friends begging for help. My phone vibrated again this time, an alert from the tracking app on Michael's phone. He had never removed it since the day I installed it for safety when he was younger. The notification showed he was calling the bank director, who would soon inform him that all accounts had been frozen by court order. During dinner, in the cafeteria, I sat with George and two other residents, a retired doctor named Charles and a seamstress named Teresa. The meal was simple but good: vegetable soup, whole grain bread, and fruit jelly for dessert. We talked about life before this place, about children and grandchildren, and about the quiet pain of abandonment that everyone there seemed to understand. I realized I had found unexpected allies, people who knew exactly what I was feeling. After dinner, I returned to my room and opened my tablet. Phase 2 was in progress. Notifications had been sent. Responses were coming in. Shareholders confused, clients worried, suppliers in disarray. Everything was beginning to crumble. A new message from Bernard appeared. Hotel reservation canceled for non-payment. They're looking for a cheaper motel. Laura furious. Michael has called you 8 times. Proceed to Phase 3. Phase 3 meant going public. Bernard would speak on my behalf, revealing the full truth about Miller Real Estate and Michael's fraud. At the same time, I would announce that 50% of my shares would be donated to the New Horizons Foundation, with part of it dedicated to improving nursing homes like Maplewood. I replied, "Approve Phase 3, but I'll attend the press conference myself. Arrange a car for me tomorrow morning, and contact Ethan and Grace. The kids deserve to know the truth before it hits the news. My 2 grandchildren, Ethan, 17, sharp and sensitive like his grandfather, and Grace, 14, a little artist who always carried her sketchbook. How would they react when they learned the truth about their father? Could they endure the humiliation that was about to come? But more than anyone, they needed to understand that abandoning one's family is never acceptable. I lay on the narrow bed, listening to the sound of rolling carts, nurses making their rounds, and muffled sobs echoing from the hallway. I couldn't sleep, not from regret, but from anticipation. Near dawn, my phone rang. It was Ethan. "Grandma, is it true? Dad couldn't pay at the resort, they had to move to a cheap motel. Mom's crying and Dad's yelling into the phone. What's happening?" I took a deep breath. "Sit down, sweetheart. I have a long story to tell you, and once you hear it, nothing will ever be the same again." For the next hour, I told him everything, the true origins of the company, the secret investments, Michael's financial crimes, Project Phoenix, and how he left me at the nursing home. I could hear his heavy breathing as the truth unfolded. Shock, confusion, then silent disbelief. So Dad was never the successful businessman we thought? You built everything, didn't you? And now he's losing it all? Ethan asked. I smiled faintly. Not all of it, dear. Your father will only lose what he didn't earn honestly, what he gained through greed, deceit, and by stealing from the elderly poor. Most importantly, he'll lose the illusion that he could discard his own mother without consequences. The line went quiet for a long time before Ethan spoke again. Grandma, can I come get you tomorrow? I don't want to stay near Dad when this all blows up. I'm sure Grace will want to come too. My heart raced. I had prepared myself for the possibility of losing both grandchildren, at least temporarily. Of course, sweetheart, but are you sure? It won't be easy. The press, your friends, everyone will talk. Grandma, Ethan said, his voice breaking. Last week I overheard Dad telling Mom they needed to deal with the old lady problem. They've been planning this for months. There was never any family trip, they just wanted to leave you behind. Hearing my grandson confirm what I had long suspected still hit me like a blow to the chest. Even though I was ready for the worst, hearing it from his mouth hurt deeply. By the time we hung up, dawn had broken. I got up, showered, and put on the only formal outfit I had packed, the navy suit I used to wear for university meetings. I pinned up my silver hair, put on my pearl necklace, and brushed a touch of lipstick. The woman staring back at me in the mirror was not the fragile figure Michael thought he had abandoned, but the strong woman I once was. Just then, George knocked on the door. His eyes held a mix of admiration and understanding. "Mrs. Catherine, there's a young man waiting for you in the lobby, says he's your grandson." Ethan had arrived earlier than planned. Seeing him standing there tall, awkward, still with the innocence of 17 filled me with such affection that I almost faltered. "You nearly made me change my mind," I said as he hugged me tightly. "Are you all right?" he asked, worried. "This place isn't for you or anyone really, Ethan," I said, thinking of George, Charles, Teresa, and all the others here. "But I promise, that will change soon." On the way to Attorney Bernard's office, I told Ethan the full plan. He listened in silence, nodding occasionally. When we arrived, Grace was already there. She had just come back from a friend's house, eyes red from crying, but with a determined look that reminded me of myself. The three of us walked into the downtown Miami office building, where Bernard had arranged the press conference. Reporters from several major networks were already there, intrigued by the mysterious invitation hinting at one of the largest real estate corporations in the country. As everything neared readiness, my phone rang. It was Michael. After ignoring his calls all night, I decided to answer. "Mom, please tell me what's going on. Accounts, credit cards, partners, everyone's calling me. What did you do?" His voice trembled, caught between fear and anger. I could hear Laura sobbing in the background. "I didn't do anything," I said calmly, "except take back what's rightfully mine." "What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? What about my kids? Ethan's gone. Grace won't answer. The kids are with me, safe, and they finally know the truth about the father they have. Mom, please, can we talk? Don't do this. We can fix it within the family." "Family?" I cut him off. "Did you remember family when you left me in that nursing home? When you said your wife didn't want me on the trip? When you planned to throw me away like some old piece of furniture that no longer matched your house?" Silence. Then I added, "Turn on the news within an hour, son. And remember, this respect costs nothing, but losing it will cost you dearly." I hung up just as Bernard opened the door, signaling that everything was ready. Ethan held my right hand, Grace my left. The three of us walked into the conference room, ready to change everything forever. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, and mine was perfectly seasoned. After decades of sacrifice, disrespect, and abandonment, Michael was about to learn that some choices carry a price no amount of money can erase. As for me, Catherine Miller, 72 years old, I was beginning my life anew. Camera flashes flickered, shutters clicked, the room filled with reporters. I'd never liked being in the spotlight, but standing there between my grandchildren, I felt a strength I hadn't felt in years. Bernard gave a short introduction and handed me the microphone. The lights were blinding, but my voice was steady. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Catherine Miller, 72 years old, retired professor, and as you're about to learn, the true founder of Miller Real Estate Group. The room erupted. Reporters straightened in their seats, eyes wide with curiosity. 15 years ago, I invested all my savings and my late husband's life insurance to start this company. My son, Michael Miller, was made CEO and the public face of the firm, while I maintained control through a network of holding companies no one knew about. I told them everything: how I had always been the strategist behind the scenes, how I set up the system that made Michael appear successful while I quietly managed operations, and how he gradually changed from an ambitious but honest man into a greedy one who embezzled charity funds meant for the elderly. Yesterday, my own son abandoned me at a nursing home. He said his wife didn't want me on their family trip. I packed for the beach, but the destination was a small room at Maplewood Retreat. The room went silent. A young female reporter in the front row had tears in her eyes. An older photographer nodded knowingly. This isn't just a family tragedy, I continued. It's a case of financial fraud, money laundering, and charity theft. All evidence has been turned over to investigators. Bernard began distributing thick folders to the reporters. I went on, explaining how Michael inflated property values, created shell companies, and siphoned funds from nursing homes. As of today, I am officially taking over Miller Real Estate Group. 50% of the shares will be transferred to the New Horizons Foundation to support struggling seniors. The remaining 50% will go to me and my 2 grandchildren, Ethan and Grace. Proof that not everyone in my family condones cruelty and ingratitude. Ethan and Grace stood, taking my hands. Their young faces, filled with pride and pain, made my heart ache but also reaffirmed that I was doing the right thing. Questions poured in about Michael, the fraud, my financial expertise, how it felt to be abandoned by my own son, and the future of the company. I answered each one clearly and calmly, with the composure of someone who had spent her life teaching students to think critically. No, the company will not fire anyone. It will be run transparently and ethically. And yes, I understand my son will face legal consequences. Justice will do its part, just as I've done mine. No, I don't take pleasure in this, I said firmly. I only believe it's time to correct the wrongs and prove that age does not mean weakness or uselessness. The press conference lasted nearly 2 hours. When it ended, I was exhausted but relieved. The first phase of the plan had been executed perfectly. As we exited the building, reporters were still gathered outside. Ethan linked his arm through mine protectively. The 3 of us got into Bernard's car, heading for the next step, filing the official case at the prosecutor's office. On the way, my phone buzzed nonstop. Michael, Laura, old friends, former colleagues, even the director of Maplewood, likely worried about the headlines. No one spoke until Grace broke the silence. "Grandma." Her trembling voice cut through the quiet. "Do you think Dad will be arrested?" Grace asked, her eyes so much like mine filled with worry. The question froze me. For a moment, I wondered if I had gone too far. Had my pursuit of justice turned into vengeance? Was I forcing my grandchildren to bear the shame of their father's crimes? I don't know, Grace. It depends on how your father chooses to face what he's done. If he cooperates, shows true remorse, and is willing to make amends, there's still a path toward redemption. She nodded, uncertain but somewhat comforted. Ethan, ever pragmatic, spoke up. "Dad made his choice, Grace. The wrong one." and every choice has consequences. Grandma's hurting too. Don't think this is easy. He was right. None of it was easy. Every step of this plan cost me a piece of my heart, but I had come too far to turn back. And more than anything, this wasn't just for me. It was for George, for Teresa, for everyone who had been left behind like unwanted relics when their children decided their parents had become inconvenient. When we arrived at the prosecutor's office, we were greeted by District Attorney Elisa Monroe, a sharp-eyed woman with the presence of someone who never tolerated injustice. Bernard had already briefed her, so she and her team were prepared. "Mrs. Miller," she said, inviting us to sit. "I've reviewed the files Mr. Bernard sent over. If verified, this represents a serious case of financial crime. For 2 hours, I went through every detail how Michael used corporate structures to launder money, how he embezzled charity funds, how he committed tax fraud through fake transactions. Mrs. Miller," Monroe said, "are you aware that as the company's controlling figure, you could also be held accountable for not preventing these actions sooner?" "I'm fully aware," I replied. "And I'm ready to take responsibility for my part. I'm not here to hide, I'm here to seek justice." The answer seemed to take Mrs. Monroe by surprise. When the meeting ended, she promised to open an immediate investigation and, based on the documents, would request the temporary detention of Michael, along with an order to freeze his personal assets. By the time we left the prosecutor's office, dusk had fallen. Exhausted, I agreed to Bernard's offer to stay at his house. His wife, Mary, welcomed us with the kindness of someone who understands pain without needing it explained. She prepared a room for me and my grandchildren, served a simple but comforting dinner, and then left us alone in the small kitchen to quietly process everything that had happened. Ethan opened his phone. "Grandma, it's everywhere," he said, his voice still trembling. "Every site is reporting." Retired professor revealed as real owner of Miller Real Estate, accuses her own son of fraud. Grace looked down, her cheeks flushed. "My classmates keep texting me. Some are supportive, others are making jokes. You don't have to deal with, quote, this," I said, taking both their hands. "If you want, you can stay with friends or go home when your father returns." "I'll understand." The two exchanged a quick, silent look of agreement. "No, Grandma," Ethan said firmly. "We're staying with you. Dad was wrong not just to you but to everyone he stole from." Grace nodded, eyes glistening. "I just don't understand how he changed so much. He wasn't always like this." Her words cut deep. Michael wasn't born cruel. Where had I gone wrong as a mother? When had he turned into the kind of man who could abandon his own mother and steal from the vulnerable? "No, sweetheart. Your father used to be good. Maybe money or the people around him blinded him." "It was Mom," Ethan said bluntly. "Didn't you see it? She's always wanted more, always comparing herself to others, never satisfied. She pushed him to be like this." I didn't respond. I didn't want to drive a deeper wedge between them and their parents. They had suffered enough. The phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Catherine, it's George from Maplewood Retreat." I was surprised to hear his voice. "George, how did you get my number?" "Your picture's on every news channel, ma'am," he chuckled. "And for an old accountant like me, finding your contact wasn't hard. I called your company pretending to be a client. Very polite secretary. She gave it to me." I laughed softly. George was sharper than he looked. "I just wanted to say everyone here supports you. Me, Teresa, Charles, even Linda, though she won't admit it. You've become our role model." His words blurred my eyes with tears. I had never meant to be anyone's symbol. I was simply a woman trying to preserve her dignity. But if my story gave others the courage to speak up, so much the better. Thank you, George. That means more than you know. There's one more thing, he said quietly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. Your son came here looking for you. Yelling, slamming tables, demanding to know where you were. My chest tightened. And what did they tell him? Nothing he wanted to hear, George chuckled. Linda gave him quite the lecture, told him he should be ashamed for abandoning a mother like you, that he had no right to demand anything. He left, pale as a ghost. The image of Michael being scolded by stern Linda almost made me laugh, despite the tension. Take care, Mrs. Catherine, George said before hanging up. And don't forget us when this is all over. We still have a domino game to finish. I promise to visit again, feeling my heart lighten a little. The night passed slowly, heavy with thought. Ethan and Grace were asleep, exhausted after the emotional storm. I sat alone by the living room window, watching the city lights flicker. Miami seemed strangely peaceful, unaware of the quiet tragedy unfolding within it. Before dawn, my briggling plater of the first into the Matic phone buzzed. A message from Bernard. Arrest warrant approved. Police will act within a few hours. I didn't feel joy or triumph, only a deep sadness. No mother should ever have to report her own son. And no son should ever force his mother to. By morning, the news had spread everywhere. Michael Miller was arrested at a roadside motel in Florida after his credit cards were frozen. Seeing him in swimwear, disheveled, desperate, being led away by police made my throat tighten. Laura wasn't there. Reports said she had returned to Miami the previous night after a heated argument. "Grandma, did you see this?" Ethan ran into the room, holding up his phone, showing a video of his father's arrest. His face was pale, torn between anger and sorrow. "I saw it, sweetheart. How do you feel?" How could I describe the turmoil inside me? The pain of seeing my son like that, mixed with the relief that his wrongdoing had finally ended. The guilt of making my grandchildren witness it, and the conviction that they needed to see the real consequences of betraying compassion. I feel everything at once, Ethan. Sadness, relief, remorse, but above all, certainty. I did what needed to be done, no more, no less. Ethan nodded, seeming to understand more than I expected. Bernard called soon after. "Mrs. Catherine, we have to be in court this morning. There will be a detention hearing. I knew this would be the first time I'd see Michael since the day he left me at the nursing home. The thought made my chest tighten with both dread and calm resolve. What would he say? How would he look at me? Would I be strong enough to stay composed? I stood, choosing an elegant gray dress, a blazer, and my familiar pearl necklace. Looking in the mirror, I didn't see a frail old woman. I saw someone ready to face whatever came next and to close the most painful chapter of her life. I wanted to appear as I truly was, a respected professor, not a vengeful mother or ruthless businesswoman. When my grandchildren and I went downstairs, Mary was making pancakes for Grace, who seemed to have regained some appetite. Bernard was on the phone, his voice full of legal jargon I didn't try to decipher. That ordinary scene, the sound of the skillet, the smell of coffee, the gentle morning light, felt oddly calm amid the storm we had stirred. "Catherine," Bernard said as he hung up and approached me, "are you ready? Today Michael will make his preliminary statement. The judge will decide whether to hold him or release him under supervision." "I understand," I said. "And you think he'll try to use my maternal instinct to soften me, don't you?" Bernard nodded. "Exactly. Are you prepared?" The question weighed heavier than the air in the room. Was I truly ready to face my only child, possibly handcuffed, begging for forgiveness and still stand firm? Not entirely, I admitted, but I'm determined to see this through, not just for Ost, myself, but for every elderly person who's been abandoned or treated as a burden. For George, for Teresa, for all those without a voice. Bernard smiled faintly, as if recognizing the strength he had hoped to see. As he took another call, I turned to the window, watching the sun rise over the Florida sky. Today would be decisive not just for me, but for everyone involved. The plan for justice was nearly complete, but I knew the real challenge wasn't punishing my son, it was rebuilding what had been broken between us and within our family. And if there was any fairness left in the world, maybe it would make people reconsider how they treat the elderly, those who once nurtured, worked, and gave everything, only to be forgotten. The courthouse in downtown Miami stood tall and imposing, a symbol of authority, with stone steps and massive columns that made me feel judged even before seeing the judge. This morning, it seemed even more intimidating. Every step I took beside Bernard, with Ethan and Grace following, made my knees feel heavier. Dozens of reporters waited outside. Flashing lights, microphones pointed toward us, questions shouted over one another. With years of courtroom experience, Bernard moved calmly through the chaos like a ship cutting through waves. "Mrs. Miller will not be making any statements at this time," he repeated firmly. "All information was released yesterday." But one bold reporter pushed forward, asking the question everyone wanted to ask. "Mrs. Catherine, do you regret accusing your own son?" The question hit like a slap. Regret? How could I possibly compress all the complexity of my emotions into a neat sentence fit for headlines? How could I explain the pain of a mother forced to choose between justice and blind loyalty? I looked straight into the camera. "Yes, I regret it," I said, making Bernard flinch slightly. "I regret not acting sooner. I regret allowing my son to confuse unconditional love with limitless indulgence." A new wave of chaos erupted, camera flashes, shouting, recorders clicking. Bernard quickly regained control, guiding us into the courthouse as security guards held the press at bay. Inside, the noise dimmed, but the tension did not. I felt the stares, the whispers, the quiet judgment swirling around me. We were taken to a private waiting room, dark leather chairs, a table stacked with old magazines, a water cooler no one touched. Grace sat close, holding my hand like she used to when visiting the doctor. Ethan stood by the window, eyes restless. "Grandma," Grace whispered, "when will we see Dad?" The innocent question pierced my heart. Despite everything, to her, Michael was still just Dad, the man who once taught her to ride a bike, not the one accused of crimes. "Soon, sweetheart. The hearing starts at 10 a.m. "Will he be handcuffed?" she asked hesitantly. Ethan answered for me, bluntly, "Probably." Grace closed her eyes, trying to block out the image. I squeezed her hand, wishing I could protect her from this pain, but knowing some lessons can only be learned by facing them. Bernard returned, his face grave. "There's a problem," he said. "Laura has hired Marcus Lane as Michael's attorney." The name made me freeze. Marcus Lane, the escape artist, famous for helping wealthy clients dodge seemingly inevitable sentences. "Does that change anything?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. "It doesn't change the facts," Bernard replied. "The evidence is solid, but Lane knows how to manipulate the media and delay proceedings." As if to prove his point, all three of our phones buzzed at once. Ethan looked first. "Breaking news," he read aloud, voice shaking slightly. Marcus Lane claims Mrs. Miller is using the law for personal revenge against a devoted son just because he suggested his mother temporarily stay at a care facility due to signs of mental instability. Mental instability? I repeated, my face burning with anger. Bernard sighed. Old tactic: discredit the victim by questioning their sanity, especially if they're elderly. His words struck deeper than I expected. My mind had always been my greatest strength, yet at 72, one careless phrase could erase a lifetime of respect. No, I said firmly, standing up. I won't let them do this. If they want a media war, they'll get one. Bernard looked at me, startled. What are you planning? I'll respond right now. A short press briefing outside the courthouse with my grandchildren, if they agree. Ethan nodded first. I'm with you, Grandma. It's time to tell the truth. Grace hesitated, then took my hand. Me too. 15 minutes later, we stepped onto the courthouse steps, facing a forest of microphones and cameras. Bernard needed only one message. Catherine Miller and her grandchildren will respond to Marcus Lane's statement in 5 minutes. The reporters swarmed like a flock of hungry birds, scrambling for position. I took a deep breath, adjusted my pearl necklace, and stepped forward. Good morning, I began. My name is Catherine Miller, and these are my grandchildren, Ethan and Grace. We have heard the remarks made by the attorney hired by my daughter-in-law to defend my son, Michael Miller. My voice was steady, neither trembling nor timid. I'd like to clarify a few things. First, it was not a retreat facility. As he said, it was a nursing home. A good one, but still a nursing home. Second, it was not a temporary stay, it was abandonment. I was left there with my suitcase still packed while my son went on vacation with his family without me. I paused, looking around at the crowd scribbling furiously in their notebooks. I knew I was giving them exactly what they wanted, a public family tragedy, but it was no longer a time for silence. Regarding the accusation of mental instability, I said, my voice rising, I am willing to be evaluated by any expert. I am a retired university professor with over 40 years of teaching economics, having supervised dozens of theses, published 5 books on corporate finance, and successfully managed one of the largest real estate corporations in this state. A few reporters chuckled softly. The confused old lady narrative clearly no longer fit. But this is not just about me and my son, I continued. This is about financial crime, about money stolen from a fund meant to support the elderly, about respect and dignity, about how we treat the generation that built this country. Ethan stepped forward, taking the microphone I handed him. His voice was steadier than one would expect from a 17-year-old. I'm Ethan Miller, Mrs. Catherine's grandson. I fully support my grandmother. I overheard my parents talking about getting rid of her. They called her the old people's problem. Today, I choose to stand with the truth, even if that means standing against my own father. Grace, her eyes glistening but her tone firm, continued, I'm Grace Miller, 14 years old. My grandmother is the strongest, kindest, and smartest person I know. There's no excuse for treating her like that. No one should ever do that to someone they love. Under the flashing lights, I looked at my grandchildren, feeling a mixture of pride and sorrow. I had lost a son, but perhaps I had saved an entire generation from forgetting the meaning of love and respect. The cameras captured every moment, and I knew we were creating an image that would appear on news broadcasts nationwide. It was the kind of story that made people stop and think. The elderly woman once abandoned turned out to be a powerful business leader, and 2 grandchildren choosing to stand by her rather than their parents. A symbolic justice, those who once oppressed now facing judgment. I kept speaking, closing the impromptu press conference. "I don't wish harm on my son. I only want him to face the consequences of his own actions and, hopefully, to learn something from them. And now, if you'll excuse us, we must attend the hearing." We returned inside the courthouse, leaving behind the media storm erupting outside. As we walked down the hallway, Bernard received a message that made him smile. "You're trending everywhere," he said. Hashtags like "Justice for Catherine" and "Respect the Elderly" are among the top searches. I didn't feel joy. I had never begun this journey seeking fame or public sympathy. I only wanted justice and, if possible, a lesson that reached beyond my own story. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, solemn yet cold, a place where lives were decided by laws and signatures. I sat beside Bernard, with Ethan and Grace behind us. Across the room stood Marcus Lane, the high-profile lawyer Laura had hired. His suit was impeccable, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled to suggest experience, while keeping his air of confidence, the look of a man accustomed to winning. The door opened. 2 officers entered, escorting Michael, my son, my only child. Nothing could have prepared me for that moment. Michael wore an orange prison jumpsuit, his wrists cuffed in front of him. The face that had always been clean-shaven and suntanned was now pale and stubbled. His eyes, the same eyes I once saw in my mirror every morning, were swollen, tired, and frightened. For a fleeting second, I didn't see a fraudster or an ungrateful son or a 45-year-old man who had abandoned his mother in a nursing home. I saw the 5-year-old boy who used to run into my arms when he fell at the playground, the teenager who proudly showed me his first perfect score, and the young man who once cried on my shoulder over a broken heart. We looked at each other across the room. I saw shock in his eyes when he spotted Ethan and Grace. Then that look shifted into painful realization that he had lost not only his freedom and reputation, but also the support of his own children. The judge entered a middle-aged man carrying the weariness of too many decisions. Everyone rose. He motioned for us to sit and began the hearing. The prosecutor read the charges: financial fraud, money laundering, embezzlement, and conspiracy in a criminal organization. Each count seemed to weigh heavier on Michael's shoulders. When it was time for the defense, Marcus Lane stood confidently, as though performing a well-rehearsed script. He claimed this was merely a family misunderstanding, exaggerated by an elderly woman confused about financial details and emotionally distressed after misunderstanding her elder care arrangements. I kept my face composed, though my blood boiled inside. Once again, they were trying to dismiss 40 years of academic work and professional experience by calling me a confused old woman. Fortunately, the judge didn't seem persuaded. When Marcus finished, the judge turned and asked, "Mr. Miller, would you like to speak?" Michael whispered briefly with his attorney, then stood. The sound of his cuffs echoed through the silent room. "Your Honor," he began hoarsely, "this has all been a terrible misunderstanding. I never meant to abandon my mother. Maplewood Retreat is a luxury facility where many seniors receive excellent care. I only suggested she stay there temporarily during our trip because I was worried about her health." Each word was another knife. Not only for the lies, but because even now, he couldn't take responsibility. "As for the financial accusations," he continued, "those are simply mistakes. My mother, though intelligent, has recently been confusing dates and imagining things that never happened." I immediately recognized his strategy, turning me into the incompetent mother. A cruel move, but an effective one. Many people the judge's age had elderly parents and knew how easily aging could cloud small details. Bernard placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, Trust the evidence, not his words. Michael went on. I just hope the court considers that my mother may have been manipulated by others trying to take control of the company. I couldn't stand it any longer. I rose before Bernard could stop me. Your Honor, may I respond? The judge looked surprised but nodded. You have 2 minutes. I straightened my blazer and looked directly at my son. Michael, what breaks my heart is not your lies, it's that you truly believe they could fool me. You know my mind and memory. I was the one who helped you memorize Shakespeare, who remembered the names of your childhood friends, who quietly managed the company while you took the credit. Do you really think your mother is confused? Then I turned to the judge. If there is any doubt, please review my records. I taught at the university until I was 67, supervised doctoral theses, and published an economic study just last year. But more importantly, Your Honor, this isn't my word against my son's. This is about records, contracts, and transfers, and mathematics doesn't lie, even when children do. The room fell into complete silence. Even Marcus Lane was speechless. The judge looked at me and gave a slight nod. Thank you, Mrs. Miller. Your statement is on record. The hearing continued with the discussion of custody. I didn't take my eyes off Michael. He lowered his head, avoiding my gaze, looking small and drained. For a brief moment, I wondered if this was truly what I wanted to see my son handcuffed, humiliated, facing prison. But then I thought of George, abandoned by his daughter, of Teresa, unvisited for 2 years, of Michael's cold words. Laura doesn't want you to come, and I knew I had done the right thing. The judge ordered that Michael remain in custody due to the seriousness of the case. Marcus objected, but it was our first major victory. As the officers prepared to escort Michael away, he looked straight at me. You won, he said bitterly. Are you happy now? Before I could answer, Ethan stood up. No one won, Dad. These are just the consequences. Grace stood too, tears streaming down her cheeks. This is about respect, Dad. The same respect Grandma always gave you even when you didn't deserve it. Michael looked at his children, his eyes breaking. I saw no arrogance in them, only regret. I'm sorry, he whispered, barely audible. I'm sorry for everything. Then the officers led him away, leaving those 3 words echoing in the empty room. When we left the courthouse, the sky was glowing brilliantly. Reporters were still waiting, but Bernard quickly guided us into the car. No one spoke during the ride. There were no tears left, no anger, only the heavy exhaustion that follows a long, hard day. Finally, Grace asked softly, What happens now, Grandma? A small question, yet it carried the weight of the future. What would happen to Michael, the company, Laura, and us, a family torn apart by truth? I took her hand and answered slowly. Now we begin again, right from where everything fell apart. We started rebuilding, not what was lost, because that belonged to the past, but something new and better, built on honesty and mutual respect. The car glided through the streets of Miami, carrying us toward an uncertain future, but I felt we were heading in the right direction. The truth had been revealed, painful like surgery removing a long-ignored tumor. Bernard's phone rang. He listened briefly, then turned to me with an unreadable expression. The prosecutor's office just called, he said. Laura reached out. She wants to cooperate with the investigation. She claims to have evidence of Michael's other illegal transactions, things even we didn't know about. I wasn't surprised. Laura had always been pragmatic and calculating. Now, with her husband arrested and assets frozen, she was simply trying to minimize her own losses. The game isn't over yet, I murmured, almost to myself. But then I realized I no longer cared about that game. I had achieved what truly mattered: exposing the truth, seeking justice for those hurt by Michael, and, more importantly, proving to my grandchildren that age is neither weakness nor irrelevance. I looked out the window, watching the city drift by the place where I had raised my son, built my career, and lived my life. So many beginnings and endings intertwined in these streets. And now, at 72, I was writing a new chapter, not the ending Michael had imagined when he left me in that nursing home, but the beginning of something far beyond my own story. "Where are we going now, Grandma?" Ethan asked, pulling me back to the present. "Home," I said softly. "To my home, the one I should never have left." My apartment downtown seemed smaller when we entered that afternoon, maybe because it no longer held just me, but the three of us, Ethan, Grace, and me. Or maybe because after such turbulent days, the familiar walls felt too narrow to contain everything we were feeling. The doorman looked astonished to see me return with my grandchildren and a few small bags. "Mrs. Catherine," he said hesitantly, "it's so good to see you back. Are you all right?" "I'm getting there, Henry. Things are being set right." I smiled wearily. "My grandchildren will be staying with me for a while." We took the elevator in silence. When the apartment door closed behind us, a wave of relief washed over me. Within those familiar walls, among my books, photos, and memories, I could finally be myself again. Not a defiant mother, not a sought-after businesswoman, but simply Catherine. Grace slowly walked around the living room, looking at the family photos hanging on the wall. She stopped in front of one. Picture Michael at 6 years old, sitting in my lap, both of us smiling brightly, a frozen moment from a childhood long gone. "Grandma," she asked softly, "do you think we can ever be a family again, like before?" The question left me speechless. How could I tell a 14-year-old that some cracks never truly heal, that even forgiveness leaves scars that never fade? "Not like before, sweetheart," I said, wrapping my arm around her shoulder. "But we can rebuild something new, different, yet still precious." Ethan, ever the practical one, was standing by the refrigerator. "Grandma, there's nothing in here," he remarked. "We need to get groceries." That simple sentence, spoken amid days of chaos, made me laugh. No matter how much the world turns upside down, people still have to eat, sleep, and live. "Let's order something tonight," I said. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." The days that followed were a strange blend of normal and chaotic. Inside the apartment, we tried to restore some rhythm, my grandchildren attending online classes while I rearranged furniture to make space for them. Meanwhile, the outside world couldn't stop talking about us. The phone rang nonstop: reporters, magazines, TV shows. They called me the avenging grandmother. I declined almost all requests, agreeing to only one interview to tell the truth in my own calm and dignified way. A week after Michael's arrest, Bernard visited with a young female assistant and a thick stack of documents. "Things are moving quickly," he said, spreading the papers across the table. "Laura is cooperating fully. It's clear she just wants to avoid legal consequences." "That's exactly her style," Ethan muttered bitterly. Bernard nodded. "She's provided new information about other laundering operations. It seems Michael was involved with some local politicians as well." I closed my eyes, a heavy feeling spreading through my chest. How far had my son fallen? When had he lost the values I taught him? Bernard continued, "We need to decide the future of Miller Real Estate. You still intend to donate half your shares to the Senior Support Fund, correct?" "Of course," I replied immediately. and I want to create a scholarship fund for Ethan and Grace to secure their future no matter what happens with their parents." Ethan, listening closely, asked quietly, "What about Dad? How long will he be in prison?" His voice trembled, a reminder that, despite his composure, he was still a teenager watching his world collapse. "Quite some time," Bernard said gently but firmly. "The charges are serious. We're talking years, not months. However, with Laura's cooperation and depending on his behavior, the sentence could be reduced." Grace, silent until then, suddenly asked, "Grandma, can we visit Dad?" Her voice was light as air but pierced straight into my heart. I hadn't thought about it, that they still had the right to see their father, no matter what he had done. "Of course," I answered after a pause. "He's still your father. That never changes." 2 days later, I received an unexpected call. "Mrs. Catherine, it's George from Maplewood Retreat. I just wanted to see how you're doing. Everyone here's been following your story. You've become an inspiration to us." That warm voice blurred my vision with tears. In all the busyness, I had almost forgotten my old friends at the nursing home, those who didn't have the means to leave like I did. "I'm taking things one day at a time, George. How is everyone there?" "Something wonderful is happening," he said excitedly. "Reporters are coming to Maplewood and other facilities to do stories about abandoned seniors. Some family members, maybe out of guilt, have started visiting again. Teresa just saw her daughter for the first time in 10 years. Warmth spread through my heart. This joy didn't come from revenge, but from hope. Maybe something good was growing out of this tragedy. "I'll visit soon," I said. "I want to use my fund to improve conditions in nursing homes." "You'll always be welcome," George laughed. "And don't forget you still owe me a domino match." After hanging up, I sat quietly for a long while, thinking about the strange turns of life. If Michael hadn't abandoned me there, I might never have met George, Teresa, or the others. I wouldn't have seen the bitter truth of forgotten old age. And perhaps, in a strange way, I should thank my son, because his betrayal led me to discover my true purpose. 3 months after Michael's arrest, life had begun to regain its rhythm. Ethan and Grace adapted surprisingly well to the small apartment. Children are resilient in ways adults often forget. I officially took over Miller Real Estate, forming a new board of trustworthy people. A completely different phase of my life began, not about revenge anymore, but about rebuilding something meaningful. As promised, I donated half my shares to the newly restructured New Horizons Foundation, dedicated to improving nursing homes and promoting public policies that ensure seniors live with dignity. The media gradually lost interest in my story, replaced by newer scandals and tragedies. For me, it was a relief. I could finally stroll through the park without being recognized, shop without curious stares. One Sunday afternoon, I took Ethan and Grace to visit their father in prison. It was a difficult decision, but I knew they needed it. I didn't go inside. I wasn't ready yet. I waited in the car for an hour. When they returned, their faces were full of mixed emotions. Grace had been crying, her eyes still red. Ethan tried to stay composed, but his tense shoulders said otherwise. "How was it?" I asked softly as the car began to move. "He's different," Ethan said after a long silence. "Thinner and humbler. He apologized," Grace whispered. "He said he regrets everything. How he treated you, how he stole from the fund, how he disappointed you. He asked if you're all right." Ethan looked at me through the rearview mirror. A lump rose in my throat. It was too soon to talk about forgiveness. The wounds were still too fresh, the betrayal too vivid in my memory. "Maybe next time," I said slowly. Maybe next time I'll go in with you." That was also the day we inaugurated the first New Horizons project, the complete renovation of Maplewood Retreat. What was once an aging nursing home became a model senior community with spacious rooms, recreational areas, full-time medical and psychological care, and cultural and educational programs. I brought Ethan and Grace to the ceremony. George greeted us proudly, showing us around and introducing the new residents. In his eyes, I saw something I hadn't before, a spark that loneliness could never extinguish. "Catherine," he said when we had a quiet moment, "you turned your tragedy into something good for others." "Not everyone can do that." I smiled, moved. "I had a lot of help, including from you. Do you know what I love most about the new Maplewood?" He pointed toward a group of seniors laughing over a domino table. "It's no longer a place where children forget their parents. It's become a place where people want to live because they feel happy here." George's words touched me deeply. I realized it wasn't just about building better nursing homes. It was about changing how society sees aging. It could be a chapter of opportunity, not disappearance. A week later, I unexpectedly received an invitation from Laura. After a few minutes of hesitation, I agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe downtown. She arrived on time, dressed so simply, I almost didn't recognize her. No expensive jewelry, no heavy makeup, none of the arrogance that once bothered me. "Mrs. Catherine," she said, extending her hand as if we were strangers meeting for the first time. "Perhaps that's exactly what we are," I replied, shaking her hand. We sat down, ordered coffee, and stayed silent. Finally, she spoke first. "Thank you for letting Ethan and Grace visit their father. That meant a lot to both him and me." I nodded slightly, unsure what to say. "I also want you to know," she continued, staring into her cup, "I'm cooperating fully with the investigation. Not just to reduce my sentence, but because I believe it's the right thing to do." I looked up, surprised. Laura speaking about doing the right thing was something I never expected to hear. "People can change, Mrs. Catherine," she said, as if reading my mind. "When everything falls apart, when you lose everything you thought mattered, you start to see the world differently." I saw a softness in her that had never been there before. The shell of pride and materialism had cracked, revealing a woman uncertain and searching for meaning. "So what will you do now?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I've gone back to school," she said, her cheeks slightly flushed. "Psychology, it was my dream before I lost my way." We talked for 2 hours. No longer as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, no longer as victim and accomplice, but as two women trying to rebuild their lives from the wreckage. I can't say we became friends, but I understood her better. Months passed, and life slowly found a new rhythm. Under the leadership of the new board, Miller Real Estate grew stronger than ever. The New Horizons Foundation expanded with 3 more branches in other states. Ethan was accepted into Georgia Tech to study engineering, and Grace flourished as a young artist, her paintings displayed in a small gallery. Then came the day I had postponed too long, the day I visited Michael in prison. The gray walls and strict procedures felt suffocating. When I entered the visiting room, he was already there. Thinner, hair streaked with gray, face hollow. But what struck me most were his eyes, once full of pride, now heavy with regret and exhaustion. "Mom," he said softly. I sat down, keeping both physical and emotional distance. "Michael," I answered, surprised that my voice remained steady. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, eyes downcast. Honestly, neither did I. The silence between us was filled with a lifetime of love, disappointment, and betrayal. "I don't know where to start," he said. "Just saying I'm sorry doesn't seem enough." "It isn't," I said, "but it can be a start." Michael looked up. In his eyes, for a brief second, I saw the boy I once taught to read, to dream, to be kind. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said hoarsely. "For everything, for the nursing home, the lies, the theft, for becoming the man who made you ashamed. I was quiet for a long time. What hurt me most," I finally said, "wasn't that you abandoned me. It was realizing you'd forgotten who I was. You truly believed I was just a frail old woman who would quietly accept being cast aside." He bowed his head, voice trembling. "I lost my way. Somewhere along the line, money, status, the praise of others, all became more important than what you taught me, more important than you. And now?" I asked. "What have you learned from all this?" Michael looked around the cold visiting room, his gaze resting on the steel door. "I've learned that none of it means anything," he said, voice shaking. "The money, the house, the cars, the trips, none of it is worth it when you lose your self-respect and betray the people who truly love you." We talked for an hour about regret, redemption, his children, and the time that could never be recovered. It wasn't a miraculous reconciliation, nor complete forgiveness, but a fragile beginning to something new. When I stood up, Michael asked, "Mom, do you think you'll ever truly forgive me?" I looked at the man who once abandoned me and answered with complete honesty, "I don't know, Michael. Forgiveness isn't something decided in a day. It's a journey. And today, I've only taken the first step. Where it leads, only time will tell." I left the prison with a different feeling. No longer anger or the hunger for revenge, but an understanding that justice had been served and that justice alone is never enough to heal every wound. Driving home, where Ethan and Grace waited for me, I thought about the extraordinary path I had traveled, from a retired teacher to a woman who found her strength and true worth again. From a mother abandoned, I had become a symbol of resilience against ageism. From a victim, I became an agent of change. At 73, I was no longer at the end of my story, as Michael once believed when he left me at that nursing home. On the contrary, I was writing a new, meaningful chapter. The sun was setting over the Miami sky when I parked in front of my building. The doorman greeted me with a respect he had never shown before. Inside the elevator, I remembered the day I left this place with my blue suitcase, believing I was going on a family trip, unaware that betrayal was waiting on the other side. When I opened my apartment door, I saw Ethan studying at the table and Grace sketching on the sofa. Both looked up, their faces full of concern. "How did it go, Grandma?" Ethan asked, rushing to help me with my bag. "It was hard," I admitted, "but necessary." Grace walked over and hugged me silently. In her sketchbook, I noticed a drawing that made me smile. An elderly woman with silver hair standing tall, holding a sword in one hand and a shield in the other. Below it were the words, "The Keeper of Dignity." That evening, I sat on the balcony, watching the city lights sparkle and realizing my story had grown beyond myself. In that quiet moment, I finally felt at peace with everything that had happened. And so, my dear friends, I reached the end of a story that began with a suitcase packed for a trip that never happened and closes with a new life I never imagined at 73. A story of betrayal, justice, strength, and above all, dignity. When Michael left me at the nursing home because his wife didn't want her mother-in-law on their trip, he had no idea who I truly was. He only saw an old woman easily pushed aside once she became inconvenient. He didn't see the woman who had been a financial expert, a university professor, the one who had quietly controlled the very corporation he thought was his. He didn't realize that after all those decades, I had learned to watch, to listen, and to wait for the right moment to act. What Michael and so many others forget is this: people like us, the elderly, carry within us all the versions of who we once were. The strong young girl, the devoted mother, the loving wife, the steadfast woman, they're all still here, just layered under time. Age doesn't erase us, it deepens us. My revenge was never a rash act of pain. It was the culmination of years of watching my son lose his way, steal from the elderly fund, and become someone I barely recognized. His taking me to the nursing home was only the final drop in an ocean of disappointment. When I froze his credit cards, exposed the fraud, and reclaimed control of the company, it wasn't mere retaliation, it was restoration. I demanded that the truth be seen, that actions have consequences. Justice, though painful, has its own kind of beauty. That journey was anything but easy. Watching my son handcuffed, facing the press, explaining to my grandchildren why I had to do what I did, each step demanded a strength I didn't know I possessed. But as I've learned, we are always stronger than we think. Today marks 1 full year since that fateful day, and my life has changed for the better. I run Miller Real Estate with more transparency than it ever had. The New Horizons Foundation has transformed 4 nursing homes into model centers for senior living. Ethan and Grace live with me, growing stronger each day, free from their parents' shadows. Michael is still serving his sentence, but our visits are different now, not reconciliation, but a slow rebuilding of understanding. Laura is studying psychology and volunteering with families of inmates, a change I never thought I'd witness. As for me, I've become a voice for the forgotten elderly. I'm invited to speak, to give interviews, even to write a book. More importantly, dozens of older people have reached out to share their stories of abandonment, of rediscovery, or simply to be reminded that they're not alone. George, my friend from Maplewood Retreat, often jokes that he deserves a share for discovering my talent. We still play dominoes every Thursday, and I always keep that promise, no matter how busy I get. I never intended to be a symbol or an inspiration. I simply refused to accept the role my son tried, to assign me the role of an old woman fading quietly into oblivion. I refused to disappear. I refuse to be dismissed as useless. And that, more than anything, is what I want you to remember after hearing my story. Age does not diminish your worth. Wrinkles do not take away your right to respect. Gray hair is not a reason to be looked down upon. Every one of us, no matter how old, deserves to live with dignity until the very end. If my story makes you think of someone in your life, someone you haven't called, or an apology left unsaid, please don't wait. Sometimes, a single phone call or a simple embrace is enough to rewrite an entire chapter of life. I hope you'll stay with me on this journey to hear more stories about those who have fallen and risen again, about love, forgiveness, and finding ourselves amid loss. And what about you? Who did today's story make you think of? Share your thoughts in the Maypraz's comments, because sometimes what you share might be the warmth someone else needs to hear.